we're going to get started. It's 1:01. We want to make sure that we're respectful of people's time. So, Crystal, congratulations on making it to the beginning of the finish line. And on behalf of the whole MCM community, we look forward to hearing your presentation. And we look forward to having you join the ranks of the alum as proud MCMers. So how we do this is for 25 minutes, I will share the screen with you. You can take over from there. You can present your slides. You have 25 minutes. At that point, I will end it, and then we will go through 2 rounds of questioning, starting off with your supervisor, Professor Meath, and then followed by Dr. Sevigny, and then I will reserve the right as chair to ask questions as well. Once we clear all the questions, and if we have time, we can open up to other of your colleagues that are on the line with you. When we're finished that, the 3 of us, Alex, Michael, and I will get on a separate phone call and confer about your project and come back with you with our final pronouncement. And by then we should be done within an hour.
Perfect.
So I hope everybody is good to go, and without hesitation, you are now able to share your screen.
Oh my goodness. 1 second. I didn't know, and I thought you were doing that. No problem.
No.
Okay. So pardon me, share screen. There we go. Apologize for that. Can you?
Yep, good. Perfect.
Oh, you can see my, okay, because I've got 2 screens going and it's not great. Okay, so I apologize for that little bit of delay. Thank you everybody for taking the time to be here today. Really appreciate it. And I know we all have very busy schedules, so it means a lot. Today, I want to talk about something that's really something I'm passionate about and something I've been working on for a long time. And I titled my presentation, Operation Resilience, How Military Families and Military Family Resource Centers Engage. So there we go. So I wanted to start off the presentation today talking to you about what resilience means. You hear it a lot in military documents, and when you hear even the media talking about military families and how resilient they are and whatnot. So Webster Merriam describes resilience as the ability to spring back easily or come back quickly from difficulties, a toughness. And I think that's really appropriate in our discussion today. So I thought I'd do a little bit of a military spin on our presentation. I'm going to take you through the situation, the area of interest, my past intelligence, concepts of operations, the analysis of the outcomes, the action, an after action report, which I just kind of love saying, and my operational limitations. And then when we get to it, how the intelligence integration into the future could look. So my camera and my screen are on different sides. So if you see me looking off to the side, it's just so I can look at my slide deck. So I'm going to go back right there. So the situation. Military families face unique challenges. They have challenges that most Canadian families don't face. And by what I mean by that is that the D&D Ombudsman came out with a report in 2013 that stated military families have 3 unique challenges. 1, they face frequent separations from loved ones, i.e. from 1 day to up to 15 months, often. They have frequently relocations, where on average every year, 10,000 military families move within Canada, and 8,000 of those families move within new provinces. And then finally, the 3rd unique challenge is that they face strain or mental stress because of having their loved one in an inherently increased risk job. So, i.e. you're sending your family member off to war during the Afghan war. That's when you're at home, staying at home, that creates stress and could affect your mental well-being. The D&D Ombudsman also stated, though, many families in Canada face 1 or even 2 of these challenges, but the military family experience is unique because they face all 3 often. So the Department of Defense, so D&D, as I refer to in going forward, states that military families are the strength behind the uniform. What they mean by that is that military families, if they're strong and resilient, as I described, then the military member can focus on the mission at hand. And because they acknowledge this, they actually put funds into supporting military families overcoming these challenges. One department in the DND is called Military Family Services, who are tasked by providing funding and ensuring that the supports and benefits that military families need to overcome these challenges are available to them. And one avenue that they do this is with military family resource centers. Going forward, I'll call them MFRCs, just to be cognizant of time. So MFRCs are located physically on 32 bases across Canada, or wings, and they're also accessible virtually in the United States and in Europe. They're funded predominantly by MFS, so that's their biggest funder, but they're governed by individual boards of directors. So each MFRC has mandated programming, but they also have the flexibility, because they're individual organizations, to operate in different ways, which has benefits and challenges, which we'll discuss later. Okay, and that leads me into my research. So my areas of interest were, I wanted to know how military families themselves are solving the problems. What information are they looking for? How are they communicating about it? Are they using MFRCs? Are they using themselves? How are they going about being resilient? And then on the other side, obviously from a communications lens. And on the other side, my other question was military family resource centers. How are they communicating with their predominant audience? And are they doing it and engaging effectively? So all good research starts with looking at past intelligence. And I'm going to start at the bottom, because the short answer of looking into what research has come on before me from this context, a communication in a military family lens, is almost nothing. What research there is focuses on social work, mental well-being, and the very few academic reports or research papers on it talk about very specific situations, military family spouse communicating with their deployed spouse. Basically that's it. Military family research has only increased in the last 15 years, so the body is very small, and almost none within a Canadian lens. So if I go to the lens that we tend to look at from a public relations perspective, I started off by wanting to look at publics, how they're formed, how they move from active to latent. Organizational public relationships, obviously we have an organization and we have a public. How are they engaging how does the relationship look? Two-way symmetrical communications. Is the communication flow going back and forth? And then for me, one of the very interesting theories that I looked into was the situational theory of problem solving. How are military families communicating to solve the problems? So to dive into that just a little bit more, public formation and latent was very interesting for me. Do MFRCs segment their publics? Are they communicating differently within different publics? Are they aware or paying attention to publics who may not be paying attention to them? Passive publics, Hallahan notes that many organizations ignore their latent or non-active publics, and sometimes to their detriment, where those latent publics could then move to active and may not be supportive of the organization. Relationship management was a second area I looked at, as I mentioned. And the 4 dimensions of a relationship talking by Gruning and Hung were control, mutuality, commitment, satisfaction, and trust in the relationship, and how these 4 factors interplay with each other. What I found from my literature review really helped inform the questions I was developing for my research. How are military families ensuring that there was satisfaction in the relationship? How are MFRCs ensuring that there was satisfaction in the relationship so that military families would use them? What was the control mutuality? Where does the power lie in this relationship, and how could it be improved or changed or balanced? So all these variables were really helped inform my research questions, or my methodology. And finally, communicative action in problem solving is a subset, a portion of the STOPS theory, situational theory of problem solving. How are military families solving their problems? And the research and the theories talked about how information was obtained, how information was shared, And the different constraints that publics may have could affect how they're problem solving or how they go about talking about it. So I found that very interesting as it related to my research. So that brings us into the concept of operations. My survey had 383 responses. Well, we actually had 449. I removed any response that didn't have full answers. They were taken out. 88% of the respondents were military spouses, and we had participation which closely matched where military families were currently posted, which I found reassuring to increase the validity. There was one note though, the survey wasn't translated into French, and there was a corresponding decrease in participation from Quebec. We had participation from the United States and Europe as well. The sample size, at this sample size with the amount of military families there are, equaled into a margin of error of 5%. And I used an Excel and data analysis pack to do some of the analysis that I'll talk about later. The final two questions of the survey were long form answers. Sometimes I find surveys they ask very specific questions, trying to gather specific data. However, sometimes you have more that you want to say on a topic, and I wanted to provide the opportunity for military families to answer these questions in the way that they felt was appropriate. So 2 questions. The main question was, what's the biggest challenge that military families that you face when communicating with MFRCs? And I'll talk about those answers in a little while. But I manually coded those answers and using a program called MaxQDA, and it's a qualitative data analysis tool that you can use online, which is fantastic. And it equaled 579 pieces of coded text, which I then categorized within 28 categories. The interviews, I was very lucky during the height of COVID to interview 10 different individuals. So there are 32 MFRCs. So I was able to capture about 30% of the population, which I was very happy with. And it was at the height of COVID, as I mentioned. And their data was also entered into MaxQDA. And then from there, I was able to code it. I did 2 rounds of coding. The first round included in vivo coding, which you just highlight the text itself, and categorical coding. I did a second round of coding for both to make sure that my first round was accurate, that I didn't miss something, or that my categorization was representative of the text. And that equaled 1,200 pieces of coded text in over 100 categories. So high level, the results from the survey indicate that 80% of military families had received communications from the MFRC. Of those 80%, 50% though were satisfied with those communications. 68% prefer to be 65%, pardon me, prefer to be communicated with through email, and 47% through social media. Now, participants were able to select multiple options, so it's not one or the other. They can choose as many options as they choose to be engaged with. Of all participants, only 56% though had used an MFRC, which meant that the survey results were somewhat balanced on those who used MFRCs and those who didn't. When asked how could military MFRCs improve their communications, 38% of respondents wanted more information that was targeted towards them. That was the top answer. The second answer was that they wanted to have more input into the programming and what was MFRCs offered. So I asked them, one of the final questions was a ranking question. Where were military families looking for information? How are they finding and solving the problems? So the first place, and I used a weighted ranking equation to come up with this answer, but the first place they looked, spouse, many of us do. Social media groups. By social media, what that entailed was other groups that had military family members, other people just like them in the group. They went there for their second source. Third source, other military families, i.e. their friends. Social media platforms. Of note, MFRC website is 5th. Now the MFRC website is run by MFS as a national platform. So it's supposed to be cohesive across each 32 MFRCs. However, it makes it big and cumbersome. And there was comments from both sides. One ED described it as big, convoluted, and I can't use it. Therefore, how are military families supposed to use it? And the survey results are indicating the same thing, that military families aren't using it to solve their problems because the information is not easily accessible. Okay, so I am, one of the unexpected discoveries that I had, something I didn't expect, was there was 61 comments on military atmosphere, the MFRC atmosphere, of going into an MFRC and approaching it for the first time, and feeling comfortable. As you can see from the comment here, it's closed off, it's unwelcoming. There was 6 indications of the word cliquey. MFRCs are cliquey. So while this data didn't indicate if it was the spouses that were cliquey or the MFRC itself, it is indicating that there is a negative connotation when and an increased barrier to access. If people aren't comfortable going into it, they're not going to. They'll find their information other ways. There was another finding from the long answers was that there was an inconsistent information across the board. Either inconsistent MFRCs, like that they were different from base to base, or the information that they found was inconsistent. They got one piece of information from someone and a different piece of information from somewhere else. And so, which indicated that they have a decreased trust in the information they're getting from MFRCs. So how are MFRCs communicating? Social media, predominantly on social media, email, they do phone calling, especially right now in COVID. They mentioned that they did warm line calls, is what they called them, to every MFRC member, so military family member, that they had contact information for. And they also said face-to-face engagement. And when I asked them what the best way to engage was, across the board, face-to-face engagement. So, which then presented a challenge because at the time of the interviews, they were moving from face-to-face engagement, in-person engagement with the families to digital engagement. However, one of the surprising results for them was that it was actually a very positive experience. Some of them were already gearing up to have a technological person on staff, and it just happened at the time of COVID where this person came on staff, and which was great. But they were also reaching audiences that before wouldn't come into the MFRC. Two working household, you can't go in the middle of the day, you're working, right? So they were able to get onto webinars and whatnot. Finally, when I asked MFRCs how they determine new programming, I was trying to gauge how they were engaging with the families. Many of them said that they determine new programming by face-to-face interactions or off the cuff. And a couple, however, did indicate a measurement factor where outcomes were measured, and that's how they determine success for their programs. One of the big takeaways from the interviews was that the necessity and to success for MFRCs was the relationship they have with their external partners. And by that, I mean not only their funders, but the base. They're not accountable to the base, but they have a partnership. The base or where they're located provides them information that they can then use to access military family members. And I'm going to talk about that in a sec. But that relationship they have was mentioned innumerable times throughout the interviews. Their ability to succeed and engage with military families is significantly correlated, I would say, to the relationship they have with the base. So speaking of that, I wanted to look at some outcomes to see if there was significant relationships between actions and outcomes. So here what you see is I always call it CHI, but it's a chi-square test of independence, and where I chose the alpha of 0.05. Anything with a p-value of less than 0.05 had a significant relationship. Anything above, there is no relationship. So what I did was I wanted to see if you were deployed, for example, on the left-hand side of the screen, if you were deployed, were you more likely to use the MFRC? And is there a relationship there? As indicated by the green box, yes, there is. The same thing with having children in MFRC use. And if you had children, did you receive more communications? And the answer is yes. These relationships, though, while they're there, they weren't as significant as the final one. So if If a military family received communication from an MFRC, they were significant relationship that they would actually use the services. So that for me was, while it seems obvious, it's also nice to see it in the numbers. There was no relationship, however, if you were deployed or the family had a deployed member and receiving increased communication. And I can answer questions on how I calculated these if you have some later. So this model that I created is a visual snapshot of some of the challenges that MFRCs face and also military families face. When a new family moves into a location, there's an expectation that was noted by executive directors that that family, that the MFRC will know that that family has moved in. And that's not the case. So there's an unequal expectation here. And what happens in reality is the chain of command, the base, has the information of who's moving in. When they may or may not, as you can see by the dotted line, provide that information to the MFRCs. Some people got it, some people didn't. They say, Joe Smith is moving in and here's his email. Sometimes they didn't get that at all. Now, once everyone, after posting season, which is generally the summer, so everyone's moved into town, they have a briefing where the MFRC will be able to present to the military member, so that's the Canadian Forces member, saying, hey, this is what we do. Please give us your contact, your spouse's contact, so we can contact them. The military member is the linchpin. If he or she chooses not to give the contact information of the family member, or as you can see in step 2, not provide the MFRC information to the family member, the MFRC has no way of knowing who that family member is or contacting them. So it's a conundrum, because while the family member has an expectation that the MFRC knows about them, they don't. The same thing happens with deployments, where the family member may think that the MFRC, oh, they know my husband's going on deployment. They don't, unless the family member or the member themselves tells the MFRC. And as in step 3, once they do have that contact though, there's definite indications of two-way communication, and two-way communication flow from both sides. And then also MFRCs tend to push information out. So it's a public information model where they're giving information, and it's not segmented often. Sometimes it is, but often not. And it's, here's all the information that you could possibly want, which can be overwhelming. So after action report, recommendations and summary. Segmenting publics and target communications to each group would be key to helping build that relationship. Right now, the relationship is unbalanced. The power is with the military families, because the data is indicating that they're finding solutions and communicating amongst themselves and bypassing the Military Family Resource Center completely. And not in every instance, but there is a significant data to prove that they're finding their answers not just necessarily with the MFRC. And yet on the other side, MFRCs are responsible for helping military families overcome these challenges. So if military families only use other methods, then there could be a risk to the organization. Spicer states that publics are at risk by their need of an organization. However, in this case, it's opposite. The MFRCs are at risk because of their need for military families. And the relationship seems to be a little bit unbalanced and asymmetrical according to Stacks and Watson. So by doing some of these recommendations, hopefully the balance within the relationship, the satisfaction and commitment on both, not necessarily the commitment on the MFRCs, but the commitment with the family members towards the MFRC could increase. So segmenting publics, providing them information that's interesting to them. Obviously, if you have children and not ready to retire, you're not interested in retirement communications that a veteran might be interested in. Using the relationships to continue to solve the access problem. That is the contact information at the onset of the relationship. If they don't have that communication, that initial flow, there is no relationship, as according to Tomlinson. Adding new families as a success measurement to their programming. So you could have a successful a program that is completely full all the time, but you could only be possibly using the same 5 families for your programs. So this new family success would ensure that they're reaching some of these latent or inactive publics and driving them and creating awareness of the MFRC for them. Increase awareness, and then that leads into my second last point, increasing awareness of what MFRCs do. Managing that expectation. If a military family member knew that MFRCs are not able at this point to have their contact information for various reasons, the expectation would be different. The satisfaction could increase if their expectations were adjusted slightly. And finally, decreasing the barriers to access, making the information that the military families need easily accessible, consistent, will significantly increase the relationship and the strength of it between the two. So my operational limitations were the sample size of the surveys. Obviously I couldn't sample all military families, so it may not be indicative. The results may not be indicative of every military family in Canada. Same thing with the interviews. I was able to interview 30%, but not all. Interpretation of the question. I did see this in the final question where I was asking about communication, and there were a number of people who responded about the challenges to communicating were the programs. So that showed to me that they perhaps didn't understand the question, or they just really wanted to talk about programming. Manual coding by researchers. So I coded it manually myself, and Saldana states that you should have 2 separate or more researchers code the entire body of data separately and then compare the 2 so that the categories are matching up and increases validity. Finally, as you can see, I am a military member. So, my husband's a military member, I'm a family member. And while my daughter in the corner is not super happy because she was tired, this is my military family. And that could have created bias in my research. On that note, while I was aware of this bias throughout the whole time, I actually thought I might, going into it, having positive interactions with MFRCs in the distant past, that I thought I would be more supportive of MFRCs and what they're doing. But as I was doing the analysis, I realized that they have some room to grow in how they communicate with military families. So getting to the intelligence integration, how could I spread this knowledge mobilization, as we've termed it before? There is the Journal of Military, Veteran, and Family Health, which would be a good fit. MFRC's Executive National Director Conference happens annually and is hosted by MFS. So I think this would be an appropriate place to present some of the findings. International Forum. There is the Canadian Institute for Military and Veteran Family Research. And of all the abstracts I found, there has not been one talk about communication in a military context. I think it would be an applicable place to present these findings. And finally, I've already been in contact with the Vanier Institute for the Family, and they are interested in the research. They have a big proponent of their research and what they do is targeted to military families. And so they have already offered to help me publish and spread the word on my findings. That was last year though, so it may have changed with, current situations. Oh, okay. I hope I spoke slow enough. Thank you, Michael, for sticking with me and for letting me cry on more than one telephone call. My colleagues who I was already bragging about. I can't talk.
You're good. Relax.
My family. Okay, I'm done. Give me 1 second.
Absolutely. Take your time.
And I'm ready to answer your questions.
Well, first and foremost, congratulations for this very interesting presentation. And the sense of nearing that finished cross line is just so huge. So well done. I'm going to turn it over to Professor Meath now for the first round of questions.
Crystal, congratulations. It has been a ton of fun working with you. You are an absolute ball of energy and passion, no matter what you're talking about, no matter what you're doing. I mean, more than once I had to pull you off the ceiling and then go have a drink afterwards when I was done.
I'm sorry.
No. I enjoyed it. This was personal for you.
Yeah.
In a lot of
ways. I tried to keep that bias out though.
Yeah, no, but that helped drive your interest in this. And I seem to get some of the most interesting, like very different capstones. I know they're all different, but this one was really different. I mean, this was very much outside of the box in a lot of ways. And I think as evidenced by how you were trying to identify how and in what ways, and where it wasn't the case, that you could take existing research and make it fit into this. But you did find a number of ways. I mean, a 10-page literature review was pretty exhaustive to get into that. So good job. I have like 10 questions. I'm only going to pick a couple though.
Okay.
And we could go in a lot of different ways. Because you guys all know me well enough that I like to operationalize everything. So first of all, I want to ask, how do you think the responses might have been different, if at all different, if this wasn't done during the COVID, right in the middle of the COVID situation, either the ED interviews or the results from the survey?
So one of my results was that people prefer to be contacted through social media. That's how I recruited all the military spouses. I was very cognizant of wanting to be known as an independent researcher, but I used social media to contact them. So that might have changed. I don't think COVID changed that. And I honestly, the responses, except for some of the comments of moving to more of a digital realm, from a MFRC perspective, when I asked them about challenges communicating, COVID honestly never came up. Maybe once. It's not that it didn't faze them, because it completely did, but it was more of a positive answer. I think that they were pleasantly surprised by the response to their new digital engagement. But they still said the best way was face-to-face. So COVID or not, it would have been face-to-face engagement as their answer for the best way to engage with the military family. If I were to do this next year, that's when I think the answer will be different. They haven't had enough time to process it. They're still just doing, right? So how they engage in that question, the best way to engage, I think next year will change, because they'll have had enough time to kind of settle into this new reality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good. And I'm sure that, Terry, you're finding this with other studies as well that are being done COVID time. I know we are at Newhouse, that I'm hoping other students will pick up some of these same topics a year or 2 years from now, even more than in the past, and chase them again. So hopefully someone who's connected to the military will latch onto this. So I have two questions, but I'm only going to ask one. I'll hold one back and we'll see if we have time. How do you think this kind of a view and this kind of a study could translate, or could it translate into other situations where there are communities, mass communities? I mean, I think of universities for one, but there could be others as well. Did you think about that at all, or do you see that at all? I mean, and I know you were so focused on this that maybe you didn't think about it any more broadly, but I'm wondering, could some of what you studied and thought about and learned here apply
Absolutely.
to other large groups that are affinity groups like at a university?
So aside from an affinity group, because there are definite correlations there, I would think it's a resource, a more so connections to the non-for-profits, because I definitely saw a difference between the MFRCs who had more money and had fundraised a lot and had money to communicate, felt that they were much better at communicating and engaging with their audiences than the smaller bases who described it as weird and wonderful communications. We've tried everything weird and wonderful under the sun, which I'm not gonna lie, I enjoyed that quote, but the ones who had more money or had communicators, there's connections that could be made from a non-for-profit perspective in how you communicate with limited resources, how you engage in that kind of context. From a very tight-knit group, that is a little bit outside of the scope of what I looked at. However, the fundamental research or the literature review that I did is applicable to almost anything where we're talking about public segmentation and we're talking about how groups communicate. And and how they communicate a challenge. So I don't know, and because I'm not familiar with the academic, I'm not, except for my little cohort, I'm not tight knit in the academic realm, how they communicate about challenges or how they communicate about problems. For us, this is for military families, is very specific. They have to relocate. They have to find a doctor. They have to find school. They have to take care of their child who may have special needs. And then you go to a new province, they don't have all the same resources. If you, for example, going from Ontario to New Brunswick, the school system's different, the resources are different, and they often have to drive several hours to get to a specialist. And those specialists will not touch them because they've been to a specialist in Ontario. So those kind of challenges are very different than I think the challenges of certain other tight-knit affinity groups. That being said, the literature review, I think, is applicable to any large organization and how they interact with their publics.
Okay. All right, good. I'm going to defer now to Dr. Sevigny, and congratulations to you and to Kevin and your family.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Alex?
Yeah, so congratulations, Crystal. This is it was a real pleasure reading this work. It's a very thoughtful piece and a fairly sophisticated research methods piece too. So it's always fun for me to read that side of things because you know, that's my passion.
I wanted to be as valid as possible.
Yeah, well, actually, that was my question. I have a question about the sample.
Okay.
On the survey. So there, you had. I noted here that there were. You had 449 participants who started, 383 who finished, and they were distributed across Canada, US, and Europe, right? And how many from the US and Europe?
Honestly, the sample, very small. I think 7 from the US and 3 from Europe, which the data is not, so the military surprisingly publishes a lot of data on military families, which is fantastic for me. There are 700 families in the States. That's it. And I actually don't know for Europe, but they don't publish them. So I couldn't correlate the amount of military families versus the response within the survey. Does that make sense? But yes, it was 7 from the States and 3 from Europe. It was small.
Yeah, so my question was just like, why include the American and European respondents?
Because I felt for them, their family experience of relocating to a new country is valid. And I wanted to hear from them as well.
Okay, that's good. And in terms of the Canadian response, so there were 227 recruited from social media groups and 215 answers were recruited from the researcher's personal Facebook page. So I guess these are people that you know, or
not all. No, I actually had a significant, and I never got I was never able to see the exact number of shares, but the people who do know me, then there was like 60 or 70 of them shared on their Facebook. So it wasn't just I was actually worried about that, which is why I had the 2 separate links. Right. Because I was concerned that there would be that inherent bias trying to answer the questions as I wanted them if they knew me, right? And I know there's a term that I can't remember for that, but that's why I tracked and had separate links when I used a social media group versus from my Facebook page. But there was at least 60 shares, which is phenomenal. And I was able to do this get these responses within 2 weeks. So what that indicated to me is that people wanted to talk about this topic, which was phenomenal. But yes, so they shared it on their Facebook page. So many of them I didn't know. I assume I didn't know because it was anonymous. Got it.
So I would just, that's great. And that's the answer I hope you'd tell me, right? And so I would just include that in your like I'd add it as a line inside your method section. The sharing part, yeah. Oh. So it doesn't look like they're all people that you know. Right?
Yeah, that's valid point.
You might want to actually put in the number of people that share, but that's great. That's fine. I couldn't find
it, which is why I didn't put it in. But
even a rough number, like
yeah, I will dig deeper for sure.
Yeah, even a rough number would be good.
Okay.
So, and for the interviews, right? How did you find recruitment? Was it easy to recruit people? Was it difficult?
Initially. So that's an interesting question. When I started this, I did like a introduction email just to kind of gather that I would have the response rate that I would need for this. And I had 15 executive directors, and this was before COVID. I had 15 executive directors respond within 24 hours that they were willing to be interviewed. So obviously I was ecstatic because this has always been a challenge. However, during COVID, 4 MFRCs were shut down completely, and which I'm not going to comment on. So 4 were shut down completely, and then the ones who were enthusiastic, some of them I did have difficulty accessing because they weren't in their office, they were working from home, they're dealing with these new challenges. And so this is why I'm thankful for those who did interview. I know a number of them were trying to get their daycares up and running back after being shut down. So the fact that they took the time to speak with me was amazing, but it did take more chasing than originally. So without COVID, I would have likely had more interview responses. I'm not 10 is, I'm very happy with 10 though.
No, 10 is great. I just was curious because I was wondering how easy it is to reach the people. Thank you for the answer. I have one more question on the methods, and then I'll defer to Terry. And that's on the provincial distribution of the sample, right?
Okay.
Where you have it skews towards Ontario, right? Which that's totally cool. In fact, the proportion, 45%, that's pretty close to actually Ontario's proportion of the Canadian population, which is very nice. But then you have a lot of Nova Scotia and New Brunswickers relative to Alberta and British Columbia. And I'm just wondering if you felt that sort of maritime overrepresentation had any impact on your findings.
So it's definitely possible, but because I didn't dive into the response, that's actually something I could do in the future, is dive into the responses by provincial responses. I didn't do that here. I think I have an answer for this that I would elaborate later while not being recorded. It's possible that it skewed the results.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. I mean, and that's something to investigate in the future.
What I wanted to elaborate on.
It was just a point of interest because
it matched the executive directors. Like there was more executive directors from the east. If we divided Canada at Manitoba, right? So
I see.
Right, so it actually matched that. I had difficulty engaging the west side of the country.
Got it. Okay.
I had some.
Thank you very much.
There. I don't want to say none, but yeah.
Before I turn it back over to Michael, I'd like to interject and ask you about bias.
Okay.
You talked about trying to work really hard to remove bias so that you could be your findings perhaps could be a little bit more objective.
Mm-hmm.
Can you really actually remove bias if you are? And is that a bad thing that you are from the community and that you are engaging with this? So talk to me about bias.
So I don't think anybody, as Michael, I think it was day one, Michael, our frame, does that look familiar? We all come to everything we do with our frame. And so acknowledging it and being aware of it is the best way to, I believe, mitigate it as much as possible. Do I think we can completely get rid of our bias in anything? No. But how to handle that is in the future, if I were to redo this, I would very much want a second coder going through my data and coding it themselves, right? That's how I would mitigate my personal bias in this. I think we always have bias. We always come with our framework and acknowledging it and being aware of it is the best, and mitigating as much as we can. My passion for this, I think, is a benefit for sure. It's one of my better qualities, I believe. But the study wouldn't have been as in depth. I wouldn't have been able to put as much effort in. I wouldn't have coded 1,200 pieces of information, because little details like that is very hard for me if I wasn't passionate about the subject. So that's absolutely a benefit, and it made my work better because of who I am and how I work. But it's two sides of a coin, right? Does that make sense?
Yep. No, just want to talk about it. I mean, because we spend a lot of time talking about bias and, you know, just being cognizant of it. And as you said, that so long as it's recognized so that the reviewer or the reader can read it with that frame of reference as well. Okay. It's good. So Michael, do you have another question, Michael?
Really just one big one. And that is, so yep, there you go. So Crystal, you know, were you surprised really by any of these results? That's going to roll into, that's A. B, how specifically should the MFRCs change?
Okay.
If you were king.
If I were queen?
I mean, if you're like the United States and you had a king instead of a president, how would you change the MFRCs?
There's so many. That's a few questions, Michael. Okay. So was I surprised? Going into it, I wasn't surprised that there was going to be negative comments from the military spouses. I expected that just from different conversations I've seen or witnessed. Speaking about biased, if I can go back just for a second, I purposely didn't attend any MFRC functions or events or anything in the last 5 years, nor have I been a part of the social media groups that focus on military families for that reason. So what would I have them do? So much stuff. Honestly, the first recommendation I have is they need to put more effort into segmenting their audiences and provide it and being open to, it's not that they're not open because they say they are, but they're open to feedback. But there's no mechanism for them to receive, there's no official mechanism for them to receive feedback. Now, the biggest challenge MFRCs face often is they are governed by individual bodies, funded by a national body, and deal with a public that's transient and moves from MFRC to MFRC. So there is a referent criteria that happens if you have a negative experience with one MFRC. It was clear that they then would bring that experience forward into a new MFRC, which may not be the case. They need to really start to segment their information and not provide it in one big blast. That's one big thing, which is very tactical. That's a tactical piece. And I think strategically, they definitely appreciate the value of communications. Most of them do. But the implementation is there's a missed beat in the implementation. The executive directors valued communication, but then it was going from the strategy to the implementation was a challenge.
And let me just interrupt you there because I know we don't have the time to get way down into the detail here, but I guess my takeaway for you is to think about that, because if you're going to do anything with this to mobilize it, you're going to be asked.
Absolutely.
And you better have a crisp answer.
Yes.
It can't be well, I think maybe, and then over here, and here's a, you need to be very, very specific. That's the only thing. And I wanted to ask that just to see if you had that in mind. I would develop that because you're going to hear from me afterwards that there's some other places I think this study can go to, and you should pedal it. So
the other thing is you need to develop the relationships.
Yeah,
they're not focused on getting the contact, and they need to do that. Okay,
mindful of time. I'm going to put a pause on Michael, Alex, and I to mute both your video and your audio. And Michael, I will call you, and then we'll call Alex then, okay? So we'll be back as quickly as we can. Hello, sorry for the delay. Technology prohibited us from speaking or connecting, so it didn't take as long as you think.
I was like, why are they gone so long?
No. We couldn't connect.
So anyways, here we are. Gets in the way again.
Professor Meath.
Crystal. I only have 5 more questions.
Okay, go. I'm ready.
No, I am really, really proud of you and happy to tell you on behalf of this committee that you not only passed this, but we gave you an honors. So, really well done. Really well done.
Thank you.
Congratulations and Where is your husband?
Kevin?
I want to meet. We want to meet.
Okay.
I don't think he exists.
Congratulations. Congratulations. Well done to both of you. Congratulations. This is, as we always say, these capstones, it takes a village to do this capstone. And apparently it takes an armed forces to do your capstone. So well done.
Someone has to watch the kids while I'm busy.
That's right.
And as Michael said, the comments from both Alex and I, that this was a sophisticated paper, pleasantly surprised with the data analysis that you did. Your presentation was very good. Despite all of us always being nervous when we do these kind of things, you did a really, really good job. So congratulations.
Thank you.
You can, in fact, change your LinkedIn
yeah.
profile right away. Put MCM. Michael and I will sign some papers, send it off to Janice. And you are cleared to graduate just in the nick of time for November. So congratulations. Well done.
Thank you.